So to begin, a reflection. A few days ago I saw a goldfinch and a yellow eastern tiger swallowtail on top of a sunflower stalk. Each was trying to find food from the seed heads and the blooms of this tall sunflower in the garden. The bird, of course, was after the seed. The butterfly was after the nectar. And every now and then the bird would move from one seed head to the next, and its quick, sudden flight would cause the butterfly to rise up and glide over to another spot on the sunflower stalk. These two winged creatures dancing together, not crashing into each other, finding what they needed for sustenance. How is it that we do our dance together, wings spread in flight, not crashing into each other, finding what's needed for sustenance, allowing all beings freedom? So if you're new to IMCC, one of you here tonight, welcome again. Or if you haven't been here in a while, just to remind you that the theme this summer has been bringing the Dharma to life. And the focus is really about how we take a closer look at our lives, waking up and seeing what's true. The Dharma being the nature of reality. So, of course, one of the first things we notice is the first truth. There is unsatisfactoriness. There is suffering. We want things to be other than the way they are. In the realm of our own lives, in the realm of this community, this nation, in the world, there's often a great deal of unsatisfactoriness. And what else is true? There is a cause for this suffering. There's an end to it, and there's a pathway leading to that ending. So the talk tonight and next week are both aimed at an aspect of that pathway, taken from the Buddha's primary heart teachings, the four Brahma Viharas. The one tonight and next week are going to focus a bit on compassion, which we really started with last week with the care committee. You may remember that compassion is one of those four interrelated heart teachings, and just as a way of considering how these four work together, here's one way you might consider it. So the first one, loving kindness or goodwill, is the wish for true happiness, and it's something we direct toward ourselves. We wish for ourselves, and we also direct it toward others. The next two heart teachings are applications of this kindness. So the loving kindness is foundational. Compassion, or karuna in Pali, is what goodwill feels when it encounters suffering. It wants the suffering to stop. Empathetic joy is what goodwill feels when it encounters happiness. It wants that to continue. And equanimity is a little bit different. It supports and acts as a safeguard for the first three. How does that work? Well, for example, if you encounter suffering that you cannot stop, no matter how hard you try, you need some equanimity to avoid creating more suffering and to channel your energies to areas where you can be of help. So equanimity isn't cold-hearted or indifferent, it just makes the goodwill a little bit more focused, more effective. So, bringing the Dharma to life, theme for our summer talks. What's possible with these four attitudes, these four dwelling places? Here's what the Buddha had to say about these four. He said, they provide the answer to all situations arising from social contact. These four are the great removers of tension, the great peacemakers in social conflict, the great healers of wounds suffered in the struggle of existence. They level social barriers, build harmonious communities, awaken slumbering generosity, revive joy and hope, and promote human unity against the forces of egotism. All situations arising from social contact. So we don't have too much trouble with this when we think about people that we love. But the Buddha's instruction to truly develop a limitless heart was to include all people within the scope of your awareness. All people. Sometimes we hear this and we think, okay, all right, I'll just add a little bit more emotional juice to my practice, and then my attitude will expand and perhaps become more limitless. Although I think we doubt that we can include all beings. So if something keeps churning inside, reasons for liking this person or hating that one, the practice starts to feel a little stymied, a little hypocritical, because we've drawn some boundary lines. Wishing compassion for this one, not so much for that one. If you still find yourself thinking black thoughts about people who cut you off in traffic, to say nothing of the people who've done the world serious harm, the practice is limited and limiting. And this might be a place where your heart needs a little bit of help from your head, your cognizing mind. So if we think of the heart as the side of the mind that wants happiness, the head is the side that understands how cause and effect actually work. And if the heart and the head can learn to cooperate, that is, if your head can give priority to finding causes for true happiness, and your heart can learn to embrace those causes, then the training of the mind can go a long, long ways. Here's one context for thinking about the cognitive aspect of this, the head side. So we know that we experience happiness and sorrow based on a combination of past and present intentions. And we also know, or we've learned pretty much, that when we act with unskillful intentions, either for ourselves or for others, we're going to suffer. If we act with skillful intentions, we experience happiness, cause and effect. So basically, what we're doing here is we're guarding against and abandoning that which is unskillful, and we're trying to arouse and maintain anything that is skillful. Did I say that right? Unskillful, abandon, guard against; skillful, arouse, maintain. So, what about compassion for the person you live closest to, at least geographically, yourself? Is it easy or difficult to be open to or to see your own suffering? To inquire into the source of your suffering? Sometimes it's the aversion that we experience for how things are. We don't want this body, this illness, this neighbor, this government, this mind state, this conversation. Or sometimes it's the suffering caused by craving. We want that job, that life, that partner. So we're reaching for something that would perhaps replace whatever is unsatisfactory. See if this story resonates with your experience. A student who is sitting and meditating comes to his teacher in despair, saying, "This is too hard. I sit and I try to extend compassion to the countless beings in the world. And all the time I find myself criticizing how my neighbor talks to his kids, how much my knees hurt, how my cousin votes, how awful the climate is. How can I ever get beyond this?" The teacher listens patiently to the long litany of complaints and sat and pondered for a time. Hoping for words of reassurance or a shortcut to transcendence, the student waited expectantly. Finally, the teacher opened her eyes and said, "These difficulties are going to be with you for the rest of your life. So what do we do with these companions? Lifelong changes, loss, injustice." Someone has called these the orphans of consciousness, those habitual patterns that we have, those ways we have of dealing with that which we don't want. Anger, fear, anxiety. And so the question is, can we allow those orphans of consciousness, can we allow them to well up and subside, well up and subside? We're not being asked to trust that everything is going to be okay. In fact, we're moving in the direction of nothing to hold on to, which is scary. We're being encouraged to remain open to the groundlessness of this moment in a direct, unarmored participation with our experience. So what does unarmored mean? What does dwelling in this place in compassion look like? So another quote from the Buddha. "We dwell pervading one direction with our hearts filled with compassion, likewise the second, likewise the third, likewise the fourth," much as we did in the meditation last month where we face the four directions. We dwell pervading the entire world, everywhere, and equally with our hearts filled with compassion, abundant, grown great, measureless, free from enmity, free from distress. Dwelling in all directions, all four, I forgot to add up, down, all around. So this is quite an aspiration, a full embodiment that asks us to extend compassion in all directions, even to the people we don't like, the leaders who appall us, the troublesome colleague, the relative who irritates us. And the quality of this compassion is to be abundant, measureless, free from distress. So here in Charlottesville, with the recognition of this month's second anniversary of the Summer of Hate, we are especially aware of heartache and suffering. And with the death of Toni Morrison last week, another loss, I found it helpful to read about her experience when she gave her acceptance speech for the Nobel Prize more than 25 years ago, in 1993. Some of you may have read about her acceptance speech. In it, she talks a lot about language, its use, its impact, and the precarious nature of words. She offered a parable of an old blind woman confronted by querulous children. Here's her parable, Toni Morrison's parable. A group of children sets out to visit an elderly wise woman, an alleged prophet who lives at the edge of town. They want to prove her powers fraudulent. So this woman, an American descendant of enslaved black people, attracts these child visitors because, quote unquote, the intelligence of the rural prophet is the source of much amusement. So the kids arrive and one of them demands of her, "Oh woman, I hold in my hand a bird. Tell me, is it living? Is it dead?" Now the old woman knows what they're up to. She does not answer. After a brief silence, she admonishes them for exploiting her blindness, the one difference between them and her. She says, "I don't know if the bird is living or dead, but only that it is in your hands. If the bird is dead, you have either found it that way or you have killed it. And if it's alive, you can still kill it. Whether it is to stay alive is your decision, your responsibility. The bird in Toni Morrison's parable was language, and we are the children. We are accountable for the life of language. If it's oppressive, it is violence, and it limits knowledge. Listen to what else she said in her Nobel Prize acceptance speech in 1993 about language. There is and will be rousing language to keep citizens armed and arming, slaughtered and slaughtering in the malls, courthouses, post offices, playgrounds, bedrooms, and boulevards. Stirring, memorializing language to mask the pity and waste of needless death. There will be more diplomatic language to countenance rape, torture, assassination. There will be more of the language of surveillance disguised as research, of politics and history calculated to render the suffering of millions mute. Language glamorized to thrill the dissatisfied and the bereft into assaulting their neighbors. And then Toni Morrison offered another possibility with language. This is what she said. Word work is sublime. Be it grand or slender, burrowing, blasting, or refusing to sanctify, whether it laughs out loud or is a cry without an alphabet, the choice word, the chosen silence, unmolested language surges toward knowledge, not its destruction. We die. That may be the meaning of life. But we do language. That may be the measure of our lives. So let's just sit for a moment and reflect upon these last words again. Word work is sublime, be it grand or slender, burrowing, blasting, or refusing to sanctify. The choice word, the chosen silence, unmolested language surges toward knowledge, knowing, not its destruction. We do language. That may be the measure of our lives. We do language in every waking moment, whether it's in silent conversation with ourselves or aloud with one another. So if you would, reflect for a moment on the nature of the language heard in talking with yourself. What role does compassion play in your language? With yourself, with others. So just a couple of notes to close tonight. This notion that we can only have compassion for others when we have practiced it for this one. It's as though it's almost as though we notice the qualities in ourselves, and we've begun to have some acceptance of that, so that we can only embrace others once we have seen and accepted the qualities that we no longer despise within ourselves. So this idea that living with anger, or hatred, or resentment really roots us in a kind of a despair. But you don't have to be a saint to find grace and transformative power and compassion. You only have to be willing to pay attention to suffering, your own, its cause, and a commitment to just notice it, nurture that which is wholesome, maintain, arouse that which is wholesome, that which is not, abandon it. So these words are from Rumi. Your grief for what you've lost lifts a mirror up to where you're bravely working. Expecting the worst, you look, and instead, here's the joyful face you've been wanting to see. Your hand opens and closes and opens and closes. If it were always fist or always stretched open, you would be paralyzed. Your deepest presence is in every small contracting and expanding, the two as beautifully balanced and coordinated as bird wings. Thank you for listening, for being here, for speaking, for your practice, for your compassion.